Chapter 1. Blood Oaths and Salted Wind. The wind screamed like a dying god over the jagged cliffs of Krakenfjord, a harsh dirge that never ceased, day or night. Waves, black and thick as oil, slammed against the iron-bound docks, sending cold brine into the air, lacing everything with salt and rot. This was a place where men came to vanish, where the wind stripped flesh from bones, and the bones were bartered for mead and meat. It was a place of axes and oaths, of firelight and the shrieks of things pulled from the deep. And it was home to the wolf-clawed tribe. The longhouse sat like a squat beast at the heart of Krakenfjord, its roof thatched with sea drake scales, its support beams carved from the ribs of dead leviathans. Iron braziers burned with greenish flame, casting flickering shadows across walls adorned with bones. Human, beast, daemon. Blood soaked the floor, fresh from the evening's pit fights, and the stench of sweat and smoke mingled with the sharp tang of fermented shark's milk. Vargan One-Eye stood near the fire pit, his face half hidden in the hood of a mangy wolf-pelt cloak. His left eye was gone, taken years ago by a beast-man's rusted dagger, and in its place was a burn-scarred socket that seemed to drink the light. His right eye burned with feral ambition, a pale blue flame of hate and hunger. Around him, the raiders of the wolf-clawed tribe drank, fought, and roared like storm-lashed beasts, their laughter cruel and joyless. He was still young by Norscan standards, 30 winters, give or take, but his body bore the scars of someone who had lived through twice that. Crisscrossed welts, bite marks, runes of crude tattoos inked with squid blood and ash. He had sailed with reavers, fought in the wastes, and bled for chieftains who used men like torches lit, spent, and discarded. But he was done serving. He was done obeying. Tonight, the longhouse heaved with anticipation. A feast had been declared after the return of a raiding party from the south. 6 longships had sailed, only 2 returned. The rest, the survivors said, were swallowed by something in the deep. They spoke of a shadow beneath the waves, of a maw wider than the sky, and eyes like molten moons watching from the dark. At the head of the longhouse, seated upon a throne of rusted anchors and kraken jawbones, was Goruk the Red-Handed, chieftain of the Wolf-Claws, his belly swollen with mead and arrogance. His laughter echoed off the rafters as he crushed a goblet in one hand and tossed its shattered remains at a thrall. Beside him, hunched like a spider and robed in kelp-draped hides, was the shaman Hruldak Blackform. His face was painted with corpse fat, and fishhooks dangled from the flesh of his cheeks and eyelids. He had not spoken yet, but his blind eyes followed Vargan with uncanny precision. "Speak, Hruldak," Goruk bellowed, slamming a fist against the table. "Speak of the shadow, of the beast. Give us words to match our fear." The fire hissed as Hruldak rose. Silence spread like a plague through the hall. Even the dogs went still. The shaman's voice was not loud, but it crawled under the skin, cold and damp as grave water. "I saw it in the blood," Hruldak rasped, his breath reeking of rot and sea brine, in the entrails of the seal-gutted thrall, in the foam at the cliff's edge, in the dreams the drowned whisper. He stretched out a hand, dripping seawater from long, blackened nails. Ulthorgar. The name struck the crowd like a hammer blow. Some spat, some crossed crude runes into the air. One warrior choked on his mead. Hruldak went on. "The worm of the deep, the drowned god's hunger made flesh, older than this land, older than the gods you name. It sleeps in the tomb of waves, but it stirs. The tide thickens with its breath. It has eaten men, ships, beasts, and now it craves more." A pause. The fire snapped. Somewhere, a thrall sobbed quietly. "The one who slays Ulthorgar," Hruldak hissed, "will be more than man. He will be king of the storms, the herald of the abyss. He will command gods or become one." Vargan stepped forward. Silence fell heavier than before. Gorok leaned back, raising one shaggy brow. "You, One-Eye?" he sneered. "You think to tame the sea?" "I think to gut it," Vargan growled, voice like gravel and smoke. "I think to drive a spear through its eye and tear its heart out while it screams." A cruel chuckle ran through the crowd. Gorok made no effort to hide his amusement. "Bold words, whelp. Many have braved the sea of claws. Few return, few are still sane. Then I'll go mad with a god's heart in my hand," Vargan snarled. He drew a curved dagger of whalebone and obsidian and slashed it across his palm. Blood hissed as it fell into the fire. "I swear by bone and blood," he said, "by the eye I've lost and the storms that scour this land. I swear I will slay Ulthorgar and return with its heart, or die and be swallowed with the rest." There a moment passed. Then Hruldak laughed a sound like a gull choking on bile. "The sea has heard," the shaman said. "It is hungry, and it waits." Gorok rose slowly, heavy chains clanking from his arms. He loomed like a statue carved of muscle and rage. The crowd tensed. Then the chieftain smiled, yellow teeth glinting. "Then go, One-Eye. Sail into the moor. Feed it your madness. If you return," he raised a horn of mead, "you'll return as king." Vargan nodded once. He turned and walked from the hall without another word. The Wormtooth was moored at the eastern dock, its hull scarred by flame and battle, its prow carved in the shape of a snarling sea serpent. Vargan stood before it as the storm winds howled, his hand still bleeding from the oath cut. He would need a crew men as mad as he, with nothing to lose and death behind their eyes. By dawn, he had them. Scary Wormskull, a berserker with a jaw of iron and a death fetish. Kolmar the Hollow, a mute spearman who drank nothing but blood. Bracca Sharp, a woman exiled for cannibalism, her teeth filed to points. Others followed thralls who slit their masters' throats, cultists chased from chaos warbands, reavers too foul even for Norscan clans, all drawn by whispers of glory, madness, or both. They loaded the ship with salted meat, black mead, barrels of rotted fruit, and weapons carved from bone, steel, and demonic relics. Vargan stood at the prow as the sails unfurled, eyes fixed on the horizon. The sea was not calm. It never was. But that morning it churned with an unfamiliar rhythm, like the breath of something enormous and ancient just below the surface. As the Wormtooth slipped from Krakenfjord into open water, Vargan whispered a single word to the waves. Ulthorgar, the sea, answered with silence, and so the hunt began. Chapter 2. Voyage into the Maw. The Wormtooth cut through the sea of claws like a rusted blade through gristle. Its warped timbers groaned with each wave, soaked not just in salt but in the memory of blood. The northern wind screamed like a chorus of damned souls through the torn sails, and the rigging creaked like gallows ropes tightening around unseen necks. For 3 days and 3 nights, the crew had seen no sign of land, only grey, churning water stretching out like an endless grave, and skies choked with ash-colored clouds that blotted out the sun. The sea was alive, and not in the way men hoped. It watched, it whispered. Below deck, the crew kept to shadows and silence when they weren't fighting. Dice games ended in gouged-out eyes. Laughs were rare, and never genuine. There was a rot to the mood, like spoiled meat under a fresh pelt, and unease that infected the air. Even Scary Wormskull, who who once gnawed through a man's throat in a berserker rage, had stopped grinning. The curse. That was the word muttered between clenched teeth, behind backs, in corners. Curse. It began with a dream. Brackersharp woke screaming, her mouth filled with seawater though she hadn't left her bunk. Colmar the Hollow, ever mute, carved spirals into the ship's deck with his knife, over and over, until his fingers bled. One thrall was found on the prow with his entrails hanging like wind-tattered flags, the word feed clawed into his chest by his own hands. They'd lashed his corpse to the mast for 2 days, hoping it might ward off whatever had taken root in the wood. It didn't. Vargan stood alone near the helm, his hand on the haft of his great axe, his wolf-hide cloak flapping violently in the salt wind. He hadn't slept since they left Krakenfjord. His one eye was bloodshot, ringed with purple veins, and his breath steamed with unnatural heat, even in the cold. He could feel something watching from beneath. At night, the dreams came to him too. They weren't dreams, not really. There were no symbols, no riddles to pass. Just hunger, a cold, endless, crushing hunger that swelled from the deeps and coiled around his bones like kelp dragged from the ocean floor. He could hear it breathing beneath the waves. Ulthorgar. Each night he saw it more clearly, a mass of writhing darkness, dotted with twitching eyes, hundreds of them, some large as sails, others no larger than boils. Its mouth was not a mouth, but a wound that never healed, rimmed with fangs like broken swords, opening not into a gullet, but into the abyss itself. He did not share these dreams. On the 6th night, they saw the first of the ghost ships. It emerged from the mist like a corpse surfacing in a blood-slick bath. No sail, no banner, just a shattered hull stitched together with chains and the bones of men and whales. Its deck was empty. The figurehead, once a lion or perhaps a kraken, had been torn off and replaced with a crucified human torso, its skin flayed and etched with runes no one dared translate. No wind moved it. No crew guided it. Vargan ordered it burned. But when they lit the pitch-soaked arrows and fired them into the hull, the ship sank without flame. It vanished into the sea without a sound, as though it had never existed. That night, the singing began, low, guttural, wet. It echoed across the waves but came from no throat. The men wrapped rags around their ears. Bracca tried to cut hers off and had to be restrained. The sound never truly stopped, not even when they reached dawn. It only became harder to notice, like the sound of your own breath. The moon rose red and full on the 9th night. The sea responded. It began with a wind that carried not salt but the stench of rotting fish and slick decay. Then the clouds parted, and the sky above was a boiling cauldron of stars twisted into unnatural shapes, constellations that hadn't been seen since before the coming of man, their meanings long since consumed by chaos. They came with wings, harpies, but not like those from old tales. These were bloated things, their talons crusted with barnacles, their feathers slick with algae and blood. Their faces were eyeless, their mouths lined with teeth not meant for birds. They screamed like drowning infants as they descended. The first tore a man from the rigging and flung him into the sea. Another landed on the deck and drove its beak into a warrior's face, hollowing his skull like a crab shell. The crew fought back with axes, spears, fists. Skerry tore one apart with his bare hands, laughing madly as it died shrieking. But the worst was still coming. Something vast coiled beneath the ship. The water pulsed. Then a shape breached the surface. Not Ulthorgar, not yet, but something of it. A daemon of the sea, warped and seething, like a fish caught in the middle of becoming something else. It had no limbs, only tendrils, and within its translucent bulk floated bones and screaming faces. It latched onto the side of the worm-tooth and began to climb. Vargan leapt into its path. He screamed a challenge and hurled a firebomb taken from the hold, a crude alchemical device gifted by a chaos dwarf trader in exchange for a child. It exploded in green fire, coating the demon. It thrashed, shrieking in 7 tongues, but still came on. He met it with his axe, howling, cutting deep into its slime-wet flesh. The blade screamed, as if in pain. The daemon coiled around him, dragging him halfway off the deck. That was when he saw. His vision blurred. Time collapsed. Suddenly, he was beneath the sea, deeper than any light could reach. He stood not in water, but in a void of black pressure and endless cold. A temple stood before him, no walls, no altar, only vast columns made of drowned titans' bones, and a throne of coral and teeth, and upon it sat something, not a god of the surface, not one of the 4 great ruinous powers, something forgotten, drowned in time, buried under tides and madness. It had no form, only presence. Its voice was not heard, but felt as though each of his bones was being used like a flute. You seek the worm. Vargan could not move. His lungs filled with cold brine. His blood turned to ice. I slept when the old ones bled. I watched the waters turn to flesh. I fed upon the first wave. I am the current that pulls down empires. The pressure crushed him. And then you will drink my breath and carry my teeth and take my gift. Vargan awoke, screaming on the deck. The demon was gone. So were 3 more crew. The storm had abated, but only slightly. No one spoke. He stood, covered in his own blood and that of the creature. His axe was buried in the planks beside him. Something was in his mouth. He spat. A small black pearl, slick with his saliva. It pulsed with a faint green light. He closed his fingers around it, and the storm hissed in reply. The voyage had only just begun, but Vargan One-Eye knew now this was not a hunt. Not anymore. This was a calling. Chapter 3. The Island of Bone Spires. The worm-tooth groaned as it drifted into the shallows, its hull scraping against submerged rib cages the size of buildings. The water here was thick, almost gelatinous, a sickly green hue that clung to the oars like rot-on meat. Above them loomed the Isle of Bone Spires, a landmass that had no right to exist. It rose from the sea like a wound, a jagged mausoleum to things that had once lived and now lingered in agony. There was no soil here, no sand, no vegetation, only bone, not human, not beast, but something older and vaster. The landscape was a maze of tusks, vertebrae, and cracked skulls large enough to shelter a warband. The sky above churned with clouds the color of old bruises, and a perpetual fog slithered between the spires like a living thing. Segmar's piss, Braca muttered, disembarking with her harpoon in hand. This place stinks of death, and not the kind that sleeps. Vargan One-Eye stood at the prow before anyone else set foot on the island. The black pearl gifted to him by the drowned god still pulsed in a pouch around his neck, warm and whispering. He could feel something here, something ancient, buried in the marrow of the island, calling to him like a war horn in the dark. He said nothing. He had no words left for awe or dread, only direction, only need. They came ashore in silence, the crew reduced now to 10 hardened survivors, each one frayed at the edges by what they had seen on the sea. Colmar the Hollow knelt and traced something into the bone at his feet. Symbols, prayers maybe, or warnings. They marched forward through a canyon of rib bones that reached into the sky like cathedral pillars. The sound of their boots on dry ivory echoed like drum beats for the dead. Every step brought a strange hum beneath the surface, as if the bones themselves remembered the pain of death and were whispering it back to the sky. Hruldak, the shaman, had spoken once of this place, long before men had claimed dominion over the waves, before even the elves had charted their cursed isles. The titanic sea gods warred here. Their bodies broke the ocean. Their bones made islands. And here, in the marrowed heart of that ancient battlefield, lay the harpoon that had ended a god, Griefsfang, forged, it was said, by a forgotten people who spoke only in screams, tempered in the blood of a Leviathan, and quenched in the breath of a dying star, a weapon that could kill not just flesh, but being. But it was not unguarded. They saw the watchers before they saw the shrine. Shapes moving in the mists, figures hunched, limping, wrong. At first they seemed like men, but too lean, too long, their limbs twitching with a rhythm not meant for land. Skin slick and scaled, teeth jutting like coral, eyes like jellyfish pulsing in the sockets. They watched from atop bleached spires, their gurgling chants echoing through the gloom. Half fish, half man, all wrong. Deep-born, Scary Wormskull growled, raising his axe. Cannibals of the tide. I fought them once, near the coast of Albion. They tear out your tongue so you can't scream as they eat you alive. They won't get the chance, Vargan said, and marched forward. They moved into the center of the island where the bone spires formed a crude arena, and at its heart stood the shrine. It was a cairn of skulls and chains, rusted iron bound around a spear sunk into the spine of some god-beast. The harpoon was as long as a man, its shaft carved from Leviathan horn, the head jagged obsidian etched with runes that bled light. But another figure stood before it, tall, armored in barnacle-crusted plates. A crown of vertebrae adorned its helm, and sea worms crawled through the sockets of its armor. It held a rusted sword in one hand, its blade weeping brine. Its eyes burned cold within the helm, pale blue fire, like the sunken dead. King Hrothak, Raka whispered, the Tide King. He died slaying his kin and fed them to the sea. The Tide King raised his blade and pointed at Vargan. A challenge? Vargan stepped forward without hesitation, axe in hand. No interference, he said. He's mine. The Tide King moved with the unnatural speed of the drowned, his sword a blur of salt-rusted steel. Vargan barely deflected the first strike, the force of it knocking him back into a column of bone that cracked under the impact. The second blow came low, forcing him to roll aside, bits of shattered vertebrae exploding around him. He rose, blood leaking from his mouth, and charged. The clash was thunder. Axe and sword struck like crashing waves, bone and steel splitting the silence as the watchers circled, chittering and swaying in religious fervor. The Tide King fought like a memory of death, relentless, silent, eternal. Each strike sapped strength, each moment dragged Vargan closer to exhaustion. But Vargan was not just a man. He had drunk the breath of the drowned god. His blood no longer ran purely red. As the Tide King raised his sword for a decapitating blow, Vargan let his axe fall and reached for the pouch around his neck. He crushed the black pearl in his fist. The world tilted. The air screamed. Water erupted from the bones beneath their feet. The watchers shrieked and fell to their knees. The Tide King froze. Vargan's eye glowed, and he drove a jagged shard of the shattered pearl into the hollow between the Tide King's helm and breastplate. The undead king staggered, spasming, brine pouring from his joints. His sword dropped. His body cracked, as if the pressure of the ocean had found him again, crushing him from within. He fell, and did not rise. Vargan retrieved his axe, breathing hard. Blood ran freely from a dozen wounds, but he was alive. Still he turned to the shrine. The harpoon waited. He pulled it free with both hands. It came loose with a sound like a dying scream, and the bones beneath him shuddered. Grief's fang. The weapon pulsed with old hate. It was not a tool. It was a memory of murder, longing to be used again. Vargan raised it high. The watchers wailed in terror and scattered into the mists. None dared follow. They returned to the Wormtooth under a sky gone quiet. The fog did not pursue. The island did not rise again. Vargan stood at the prow as they sailed away, Grief's fang strapped to his back, one eye burning, one god left to kill. Chapter 4. Abyssal Dreams. The sea changed its color first. It bled from iron gray to a bruised violet, streaked with veins of sickly green light that pulsed beneath the surface like a diseased heart. The wind fell away, leaving the sails to hang limp and rotting, and the Wormtooth drifted forward not by current or oar, but by a slow, inexorable pull, as if the ocean itself were inhaling. No birds followed them now. No clouds crossed the sky. Above was a dome of unmoving black, pricked with warped stars that hurt the eye to linger upon. Below was depth without bottom. They had sailed beyond the borders of fear and into the waters where fear was born. The crew dwindled. It did not happen all at once. It never does. One night, a thrall named Eirik vanished from his watch. His spear lay neatly propped against the rail, his boots placed side by side as though he had stepped out of them willingly. No blood, no struggle, only faint wet footprints leading to the edge of the deck, and then nothing. The next night, 2 more were gone. Scary Wormskull swore he saw one of them smiling as he climbed over the side, tears streaming down his face, arms outstretched as if welcoming a lover. When Scary roared and rushed to stop him, the man was already slipping beneath the surface, mouth open in a silent scream of ecstasy. That was when the singing began. It did not come from above or around them, but from below, from the immense, crushing dark under the hull. A chorus of voices, layered and overlapping, neither male nor female, neither human nor beast. They sang of warmth, of rest, of the end of pain, of a place where the sea cradled you forever and the weight of existence slipped away like breath from dead lung. Some wept when they heard it, others laughed. Kolmar the Hollow stopped carving his symbols. Instead, he stood at the rail for hours, staring into the depths, lips trembling as if shaping words he no longer needed a tongue to speak. Brackasharp slept with her fingers hooked into the planks, nails cracked and bleeding, snarling whenever anyone tried to pry her loose. Vargan One-Eye listened too. He could not block the sound. None could. It crawled through the skull, seeped into marrow, coiled around thought. But where it promised comfort, he answered with fury. Where it whispered surrender, he spat defiance. He bound himself to the mast, with chain and iron hooks driven through his own flesh when the call grew strongest. He bit through leather straps until his teeth bled. He screamed curses at the sea until his voice tore raw. I will not kneel, he roared into the dark. I will not sink. The sea did not answer. Sleep became a weapon turned against him. When Vargan closed his eye, he dreamed of Ulthorgar, not as a distant shape beneath the waves, but close, intimate, its enormity filling the world. He dreamed of its flesh, layered and pulsing, continents of scarred hide riddled with mouths that whispered his name. He dreamed of its eyes opening one by one, ancient and hateful, each containing the reflection of a drowned world. He dreamed of being swallowed. In those dreams, he did not drown. He descended, through spiraling gullets of bone and muscle, through seas, inside seas, until he stood once more in that pressureless void before the throne of coral and teeth. The forgotten sea god waited there. It did not speak with words this time. It showed him visions instead, cities dragged screaming into the deep, fleets crushed like toys between closing jaws, gods wounded, bleeding oceans into the void. And always Ulthorgar, feeding, growing, becoming more than a beast, becoming a catastrophe given will. You hunt what should not die. The presence pressed into him. You carry my gift. But it is not enough. Vargan woke from those dreams, choking on seawater that filled his lungs despite never leaving the deck. He spat it out, gasping, his muscles twitching with remembered pressure. He was changing. He could feel it in the way the sea's rhythm now echoed in his pulse, in the way pain no longer faded, but settled, nesting inside him like a familiar ache. Sometimes, when the ship creaked, he could swear it spoke, not in words, but in intention, hunger, descent, inevitability. The crew noticed. They watched him when they thought he wasn't looking, whispered that his shadow moved when he did not, that his one remaining eye reflected shapes that were not there, that the harpoon on his back, grief's fangs, sometimes bled salt water onto the deck. Then the sirens came closer. Their forms rose briefly to the surface during the blackest hours, pale and slick, their upper bodies almost beautiful in a ruined way, their lower halves writhing masses of fins and tendrils. Their mouths opened too wide when they sang, splitting their faces, revealing rows of glassy teeth. They did not attack. They did not need to. They beckoned. One by one, the crew answered. Bracca Sharp was found at dawn, half submerged at the bow, her arms wrapped around nothing, lips peeled back in a smile so wide it split her cheeks. When Vargan dragged her free, her eyes were gone, dissolved into milky hollows. She died laughing. Scary Wormskull lasted longest. Rage kept him anchored the same way it held Vargan. But rage can turn inward. One night, driven mad by voices only he could hear, Scary attacked the crew, bellowing that they were impostors wearing stolen skin. Vargan broke his neck with a single blow and tossed his body into the sea. The sirens sang louder, and among the dwindling crew, something else took root. Fear curdled into resentment, awe into envy. It was Colmar the Hollow who turned, mute and pale, eyes sunken. He had been spared by the whispers longer than most. He listened more than he slept, more than he watched. He had learned their rhythm, their promises. He knew the truth that crept beneath the songs. Ulthorgar did not want to be hunted. It wanted to be fed. On the 13th night since leaving the island of Bone Spires, as the Wormtooth drifted through a dead calm so complete it felt like the world was holding its breath, Colmar made his move. Vargan sensed it before he saw it. The pressure changed. The sea tightened. He rose from his chained sleep and tore the hooks from his flesh, blood slicking the deck as he charged toward the stern. There, by the shrine of bones and chains they had erected to appease the deep, Colmar stood with 3 other survivors, their eyes glassy, their mouths murmuring the siren song. They had bound Grief's Fang to a crude altar of skulls. They had slit their palms and painted runes across the deck in blood and brine. Colmar held a blade to the steering oar. The ship turned slowly, deliberately toward a vast, circular disturbance in the water ahead, a place where the sea folded inward, spiraling down into darkness. The more! Vargan roared and charged. One cultist lunged at him, screaming praise to the deep. Vargan split him from collarbone to navel with his axe and kept moving. Another threw himself into the sea willingly, arms spread wide. Kolmar did not flee. He faced Vargan, eyes bright with revelation. He spoke. "You cannot kill a god," Kolmar whispered, voice wet and wrong. "But you can become its herald. Give it the ship, give it the spear, give it you." Vargan answered by driving his shoulder into Kolmar's chest, sending both of them crashing into the altar. Bone shattered. The sirens screamed. Kolmar slashed wildly, cutting Vargan's side open. Pain flared, but it anchored him, burned away the whispers. "You listen," Vargan snarled, grabbing the man by the throat. "I don't kneel. I don't offer. I take." He head-butted Kolmar, crushing his nose into his skull, then hurled him screaming into the maw. The water swallowed him instantly. The spiral slowed. The siren song faded to a distant wail. Vargan reclaimed Grief's fang, ripping it free from the altar. He stood alone on the deck, blood-soaked, surrounded by corpses and silence. Below, something massive shifted. Ulthorgar had felt the offering and rejected it. The hunt was no longer distant. It was waiting. Chapter 5. The Depths Awake. It began with silence. The kind of silence that precedes a scream, or the moment before a blade slips into flesh. The kind of silence that trembles, taut and waiting, soaked in the thick breath of inevitability. The sky was flat and black above, not a cloud, not a star. The ocean below reflected it perfectly, a mirror of absolute stillness, until the worm-tooth shuddered. The sound came next, a deep groan from beneath, not of wood or whale or wave, but of something older. It was not a sound made by a creature, it was the sound of the sea remembering pain, of the earth recalling a wrong never righted. Then came the breath. The water inhaled. The sea fell away in every direction as if the world itself was being drained. The worm-tooth lurched, its hull creaking and groaning, sails snapping from their bindings. Around them, the ocean twisted, coiling inward, a spiral of apocalyptic scale, a maw without teeth. The whirlpool opened like an eye. It was vast, the center a vortex of liquid night, a churning spiral wide enough to swallow cities. Waves rose like towers and fell like thunder. But the worm-tooth did not break. It was pulled, drawn toward the center like a nail to a magnet. Vargan One-Eye stood at the bow, unshaken, Grief's fang strapped to his back, chains still hanging from his torn flesh. The rest of the crew, what remained, scrambled in panic, tying themselves to the mast, to one another, to anything. But none of them screamed. Screaming was useless now. They had crossed the last horizon. Beneath them, the sea breathed again, and something rose. At first, it was a shape in the depths, impossibly vast, rising faster than it should. The water turned red, an oily, rotting hue that churned with bloated corpses, fish with no eyes, and limbs that had no right to move. Then the head surfaced, or what passed for one. Ulthorgar rose like a continent uncoiling, not a beast, not a god, but a monument to consumption. Its body was not one mass, but layers, barnacle-encrusted plates of rotting hide, pale tendrils thicker than ships slithering through the waves, a spinal ridge, the length of mountains crowned in coral and rusted anchors. Its skin writhed with life, leeching things, blind parasites, and eyes, so many eyes, each blinking in sequence, each larger than the last. Its mouth was not a mouth, but an event, a rupture in reality, rimmed with spiraling teeth and void-like hunger. It opened not to a throat, but to depths a tunnel into the underworld, or worse, into itself. It spoke no words. Its presence was the message. Vargan moved before thought could catch him. He unstrapped Grief's fang from his back, the weapon humming with the rage of gods long devoured. The harpoon pulsed in his hands, its runes glowing blood-red in the chaos-lit sky. His crew watched, broken and bloodied, some weeping, some laughing, as he strode to the edge of the bow. He did not pray. There were no gods left worth speaking to. He threw. Grief's fang left his hand like a lightning bolt, trailing crimson fire, and struck Ulthorgar in the side no more than a pin against the mass. But the reaction was immediate. Ulthorgar screamed, not in sound, but in consequence. The sea buckled. Waves exploded outward. The whirlpool surged, dragging the worm-tooth down at a sickening angle. The sky tore, literally split, as if the veil between worlds had been pierced. Light bled through, but not from sun or star. It was the light of madness, of drowned memory. Vargan held onto the rail as the ship pitched. Grief's fang was buried deep in the beast's flesh, its chain still wrapped around the harpoon deck spindle. "Brace it," he bellowed, as the crew scrambled to secure the chain. But it was too late. Ulthorgar began to sink, not slowly, not with grace, but with violence. It dragged, and the worm-tooth, chained to the god-beast by Vargan's defiant strike, was pulled with it. Wood cracked, masts splintered, the sails ripped free like flayed skin, and the ship was taken. The last thing Vargan saw before the ocean consumed the sky was the spiral above the mark of something vast, eternal, and watching. Then darkness. They did not drown. There was no water here, not as men understood it. The worm-tooth drifted through a pressureless expanse, suspended in a medium that was not quite liquid, not quite void. Colors bled where they shouldn't, purples that tasted like iron, reds that hissed with screams. Stars moved below them, dead stars, orbiting shapes that had no form but weight. Nothing here made sense. They had passed into Ulthorgar. The beast was more than flesh. It was realm, a pocket of unreality forged by endless hunger. They floated through its belly, but there were no stomach walls, only shifting landscapes made of drowned things, shattered altars, sunken cities, forests of skeletal coral, bones of impossible creatures hung like chandeliers in a cathedral of death. Vargan rose from wreckage. The worm-tooth had shattered, only its foredeck and mast remained, floating like a broken raft. Of his crew, only 3 clung to life, wide-eyed and wordless, their minds already fracturing under the pressure of being here. A shape passed above them. He looked up, and there was no up, only more of Ulthorgar. A tendril, thicker than a mountain ridge, slithered overhead. Trailing cities tangled in its coils. From their broken windows, faces stared out, not screaming, not moving, just staring, trapped in stillness. Vargan stumbled forward. Each step echoed with a different memory. One moment he walked on barnacle-covered boards, the next on glass, then bone, then the faces of the dead. He clutched the chain of Grief's fang, still embedded in Ulthorgar's flesh, somewhere behind them. It tugged faintly. The beast felt him. Its awareness was not attention. It was annihilation. Just by looking at him, it burned pieces of him away. Memories faded, names forgotten, scars unremembered. But Vargan grinned through bloodied teeth. "Come then," he muttered, one eye blazing. "Let's finish the song." He pressed onward, into the belly of the god, following the chain toward the heart, toward the end. Chapter 6. In the Belly of the God. Vargan awoke not to pain, but to warmth wet, pulsing warmth that clung to his flesh like afterbirth. His breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale thick with a stench that defied description. Salt turned rancid, blood left to clot for centuries, the breath of something that had never needed lungs. He blinked. There was no sky. Above him stretched a vast ceiling of undulating flesh, veins like tree roots glowing faintly within the membrane. It flexed and twitched with each distant pulse, contracting and relaxing like a sleeping beast's sigh. A low vibration passed through it all. Not quite a heartbeat, not quite a breath, just motion, constant and unknowable. He was inside. The harpoon chain, still wrapped around his arm, extended behind him, disappearing into the dark. Bits of shattered wood from the worm tooth floated in shallow pools of iridescent liquid. Around him, 3 others stirred what remained of the crew. Braca sharp, though her filed teeth were now cracked and bloodied. She murmured to herself, arms wrapped around a skull she cradled like a babe. Hjort, a mast-bound rower with eyes gone milky white. He twitched, whispering the names of gods Vargan had never heard. And the 3rd, Torgal Blacktongue, who had once been a navigator, now silent and staring, fingers tapping out patterns against his chest like he was still steering a rudder. They had survived. For now, but survival meant little here. The floor beneath them pulsed, with each step flesh soft and semi-solid, covered in patches of chitin, bone, or cartilage. In places it gave way to slime pools filled with twitching organs. Strange tumors jutted from the walls like candles, each sprouting luminous polyps that opened and closed like breathing mouths. They moved forward in silence, following the faint pull of the harpoon chain. Grief's fang had burrowed deep into Ulthorgar's hide, and it had not released its grip. That meant something. Vargan clung to that. As they walked, the air began to change. It wasn't just the smell, it was memory itself. Whispers followed them, spoken in familiar voices. Vargan heard his father's drunken curses, his mother's screams when the raiders took her, the desperate gasps of his first kill. The sounds drifted between the folds of flesh like incense in a temple. They passed the remains of a ship, a Bretonnian frigate, half dissolved, tangled in ropes of intestine. Inside, skeletons sat at shattered tables, still gripping rusted goblets. One raised its head as they passed. Its jaw opened. "You were meant to drown," it rasped. Braca snarled and hurled a bone at it. The skeleton collapsed into dust, only to reform moments later. Farther on, they passed ruins, not of ships, but of cities. Great spires of coral and shell, broken palaces carved from pearl, statues of strange gods half swallowed by the flesh. This place was a graveyard of empires devoured whole. In the distance, lights flickered where no flame could burn. Shapes moved within them, tall, slow figures with limbs too long and too fluid. They did not approach, but they watched, always watched. A sudden shriek cut through the humid air. Hjort dropped to his knees, clawing at his face. "They're inside! They're in my eyes!" he howled. No one moved to stop him as he tore them out. He collapsed in a pool of green bile, twitching, then still. Braca muttered a half-prayer. Torgal didn't blink. The ground tilted. The flesh beneath them rippled like a tide. Vargan gritted his teeth and pressed on. Eventually, they came to a cavern, if it could be called such, where the meat gave way to something else. Not stone, but fossil. Bone fused into the walls like foundations of some ancient shrine. The air grew still. The stench lessened. At the center stood the altar. It rose from the floor as if grown, not built twisted coral, blackened like charred wood, spiraling into a crude throne surrounded by heaps of skulls, some still fresh with rotting skin. Barnacles clung to its surface, and strange barnacle-like eyes opened and closed along the edges. Behind it loomed a carving, no, a presence etched into the wall, the figure of a god not made by men. Its form was both fish and storm, tentacle and tooth, a shape that should not have been perceived. It shifted as they looked upon it, and the longer they stared, the more it consumed, not flesh. Meaning, Braca dropped her skull and fell to her knees. He waits, he watches, he knows. Torgal didn't speak. He walked forward and placed both hands on the altar, and then he screamed. The flesh of his arms blackened, veins bulging, nails peeling back. The altar drank him, bones first, then blood, then breath. In moments, there was nothing but smoke and a single eye, rolling free across the floor before bursting into flame. The god had answered. Vargan stepped forward, alone now. Braca remained kneeling, murmuring a prayer not to the god, but to the depth, a wish for silence. Vargan spat blood onto the altar. "You want a sacrifice?" he snarled. "You've had one. You've had hundreds." The altar pulsed. The walls closed in. Not blood, not death, self. The voice entered him not as sound, but pressure behind his eyes. It crushed thought, cracked memory, and within that pain bloomed understanding. You seek to leave. The heart awaits, but the path requires price. The gate is soul. One must stay. One must be made root. Braca looked up. No. Vargan turned to her. "You heard it." She nodded. They both knew. It was a trade. One life to remain within the beast anchored to open the path forward. Not just a death, but a surrender. A soul unraveled, strung like bait to lure the way open. Madness as gateway. "I'll do it," she said. Vargan shook his head. "No, I'm already half broken," she rasped. You still burn." She reached into her belt and produced a shard of bone, sharp as any blade. Without waiting, she slit her throat wide. Blood sprayed across the altar. The god drank. Braca fell, convulsing. The walls screamed, and then they parted. The flesh of the beast peeled open, revealing a path downward, a tunnel lined with black pearls and twitching eyes. Light poured from below, not warm or bright, but true, a passage to the heart. Vargan looked down at her corpse. "May the sea never take your name," he whispered. And he descended, alone, into the bowels of the god. Chapter 7. The Heart That Defies. The passage descended like a wound torn through flesh and time. Vargan pressed forward, shoulders hunched beneath the dripping, pulsating walls of Ulthorgar's innards. The tunnel writhed with every step, slick and tight, closing behind him like a throat swallowing. There was no light, only the cold gleam from Grief's fang at his back, its runes whispering through the dark. The harpoon pulsed with heat that was not fire, a rage remembered, an oath yet to be fulfilled. Vargan bled from 100 shallow cuts. Each beat of his heart felt slower than the last, as though the deeper he went, the more the beast took from him. His limbs dragged, his thoughts frayed, but the thing inside him, the wound where the god's touch lingered, kept him moving. He did not dream anymore. Dreams were a mercy left behind. At last, the tunnel opened. He stumbled into a vast chamber, and the breath caught in his throat. It was a cathedral of living meat. The heart of Ulthorgar hung suspended in the center, a colossal organ, pulsing with thick, oily life. It was not shaped like any mortal heart, but rather a malformed tumor of tendrils, arteries, and flailing veins, each one dripping ichor that steamed as it hit the floor. The walls around it twitched with the rhythm of its beat, a bass rumble that vibrated through Vargan's bones and made his teeth ache. From the ceiling dangled bones, femurs of giants, the cracked skulls of dragons, the rusting husks of lost gods. They hung like trophies, swaying to a rhythm not made by wind. And in the pools below, things swam. Things with too many faces. Things that remembered what it was to be men and hated the memory. The beast was aware of him now. The walls throbbed harder. The ceiling wept blood. The entire chamber shuddered with a groaning that came from everywhere and nowhere. "You come to wound me," the pressure said, not words, but a thought pushed into his skull. Vargan stepped forward, every movement pain. "I come to end you. You are mine already. I carried you from the womb. I marked you in sleep. You breathed me." Vargan unslung Grief's fang. The weapon screamed in his hand, eager and bloodthirsty. His arms trembled with the weight of it, not because it was heavy, but because it was right, meant to be here, meant to be used. The tendrils guarding the heart uncoiled. They struck like whips, too fast to track. Vargan ducked the first, felt the second skim his ribs and tear a ragged trench through his side. Blood sprayed across the meat floor. He rolled, slammed to a knee, and threw the harpoon, but Ulthorgar twisted. The heart jerked aside as though with thought alone, and Grief's fang buried itself in the chamber wall instead. Ichor poured from the wound like fire. Vargan roared and ran for the weapon. Another tendril lashed him from behind. He felt ribs break. His breath left him in a shuddering grunt. He crashed against the wall, reached out with blood-slick fingers, and tore Grief's fang free. The chamber screamed. This time, the tendrils struck in unison. He leapt through them, lost a chunk of thigh to one, but drove forward. The heart loomed before him, now towering, ancient, a thing that should not have lived. Its veins pulsed with the blood of gods. Vargan raised the harpoon high. Ulthorgar shrieked. It was not a sound, but a breaking, a rupture in space and pressure. The meat of the world split apart. The pools boiled. The walls cracked. And beneath his feet, the floor began to drop. He would have one strike, just one. Vargan screamed every name he had been given: Sun, Reaver, Oathbreaker, Kinslayer, Leviathan-Slayer, and drove Grief's fang into the heart. The weapon sank deep. The heart recoiled, spasming. Ichor erupted like a geyser. The entire chamber convulsed violently. Vargan was thrown backward, his arm dislocated, his vision gone white with pain. The harpoon remained embedded. The world howled. Ulthorgar thrashed. The beast did not die cleanly. The chamber shook apart as the beast spasmed, waves of muscle tearing free from themselves. Tendrils flailed blindly, crushing everything. The floor split, vomiting oceans into air. The beating of the heart turned erratic, slower, then faster, then wild. Blood sprayed from the walls in gouts that hissed and steamed. Vargan crawled through the carnage. Bones rained from the ceiling. Fissures split across the chamber, revealing endless dark beneath. The sea screamed above and below. The laws of the world failed, forgotten in the death throes of something older than them. He looked back. Grief's fang burned with unholy light, its runes flaring as it fed on the god-beast's dying blood. And then the heart ruptured. The explosion was not fire or force, it was unmaking. A wave of pressure that folded flesh, reversed blood, shattered souls. Vargan screamed as his skin peeled away. as his body convulsed in pain beyond comprehension. And then everything fell. The undersea world collapsed. The walls of Ulthorgar's body crumpled inward, dragging ruins, corpses, cities, and sky into itself. The void yawned wide as the Leviathan's final breath poured out a hurricane of hate, pulling the entire realm down into its own corpse. Vargan fell with it. He fell past memory, past thought, past death, but he held on to rage, to purpose, to the name he had given himself. And through it all, he heard only one thing: the dying heartbeat of a god. Chapter 8. Return of the Leviathan-Slayer. The surf boiled crimson as it crashed against the jagged rocks of Kraken Fjord. Storms lashed the sky, not with rain but with ash and shattered starlight. The sea had changed its pulse slower, its tides bitter, as if mourning something vast and ancient now gone. The fishermen who lived in the hovels near the cliffs whispered of the dying of whales, of birds flying inland and never returning, of tides that retreated and did not return for days. And then the body washed ashore. Or what remained of it? It crawled from the blood-thick surf, dragging itself across the broken stones like something not meant to return, covered in black ichor and strips of rotted flesh, bones protruding from wounds that did not bleed. It collapsed near the wreck of a long-forgotten shrine to Stromfels, the god of the storm and sea. Hours passed before it stirred again. A hand moved massive, calloused, blistered, fingers clenched against the stone. Then, slowly, painfully, the thing rose. It was a man, or had been. Vargan One-Eye stood once more on the shores of Norsca. He was gaunt, his skin pulled tight over sinew and scar, but the power in him was unmistakable, coiled in every step, every breath, every blood-slick muscle. The tattered remnants of his wolf-hide cloak clung to his shoulders, its fur matted with brine and filth. One eye remained in his skull, but it was no longer human. It burned with a sickly green light, pulsing in rhythm to something unseen. In his arms he carried the heart. It was the size of a war drum, slick and black, veined with veins that pulsed slowly like the bellows of some infernal forge. It beat, still, in his grasp. With every thud, the air around him trembled, and the tide retreated, as though recoiling in fear. Ulthorgar's heart, the Leviathan's soul. Word spread quickly. The tribes came from the mountains and the coast, drawn by omens and the scent of God's blood. The Wolf-Claw tribe came first, their chieftain long drowned in a voyage that never returned. Goruk, the red-handed's throne, had been empty for months, its bones split by rival claimants. Now they bowed, without a word, when Vargan limped into the great hall. No one challenged him, not with that thing in his hands. They lit the fires that night not for warmth, but for witness. In the bone-ringed courtyard of Kraken Fjord, beneath a sky torn by strange stars and the shrieking of birds that had never flown this far north, the tribes gathered, hundreds, perhaps thousands, warriors clad in rust and furs, thralls painted in blood, seers frothing with prophecy, children raised high to see the man who had slain the sea. Vargan stood among them, bare-chested, wounds still open, steam rising from his skin despite the cold. At his feet sat the heart of Ulthorgar, placed upon a stone altar once used for sacrifices to Tsench. The altar cracked under the weight. The blood soaking into the stone smoked and hissed. Hruldak Blackfoam, the oldest shaman of the north, blind and covered in sea filth, crawled forward through the mud and bone. He pressed his forehead to the ground before Vargan, and began to speak not in Norse tongue, but in the deep speech, the language of currents and storms. He returns from the belly of the drowned god, he who bled the deep, he who screamed into the abyss and was not broken. The tribes echoed the words, low at first, then louder. Leviathan-Slayer, God-touched, Breaker. They chanted as Hurldak rose and smeared blood across Vargan's chest in jagged runes. He did not flinch, not when the burning began, not when the winds rose and carried the ash of old gods into the night. Vargan did not speak. He listened. The heart beat louder now. His own chest rose and fell in unison. He could feel the depth inside him, the pressure of the sea, the knowledge of weight and silence and time stretched too far. The Leviathan was dead but not gone. It lived in him, and it had not gone unnoticed. As the chants grew wilder, as warriors beat shields and tore their flesh in celebration, as thunder cracked over the longhouse, Vargan saw them figures in the dark, not mortal, the Watchers. They lingered on the edge of firelight shapes, too tall, too narrow, wrapped in dripping cloaks that moved like water, their faces hidden, their presence undeniable. Not daemons, not spirits, something older, something that had existed when chaos was still forming, when the first gods sank into the sea. They watched him, not with malice, but with interest. He met their gaze, his eye no longer his burned hotter. The fire pits roared, the sky cracked open, and Vargan roared. It was not a cry of victory, it was a summons to war, to worship, to wrath. The Leviathan-Slayer had returned not just as a man, not even as a warlord, but as a herald, a warning, and the sea would never forget him.